Wishing you a very good evening on this Portugal Calling webinar, changes in Portuguese housing laws, if, when and how they will affect you. No better person to speak to this, and I'm delighted to be talking to you, Dr. Daniel Reis from Reis and Pelicano. Good evening, how are you?
Good evening, quite all right. It's been indeed a few interesting months with this Mais Habitação package. So it seems that we're reaching the final end of this situation. And the president will probably, or the parliament will need to revote the law. And this should occur around mid-September. And then the law will be sent again to the president and should be finally approved. So we are accounting to have this Mais Habitação or more habitation package approved towards the end of September. That's roughly the ballpark that we are considering. And as the biggest party that is in power said that they wouldn't touch the law again, they would not introduce any changes. What's been out in the media is that the package will be reapproved by the parliament. And in situations like this, the Portuguese constitution states that it's mandatory for the president to approve it. And as the president already said that he doesn't see any constitutional problems with the law, which was a bit of a surprise to me, I must confess. We are considering that we'll have an operating Mais Habitação package towards the end of this month. So that's the overview of the law and the trajectory of the law. That started around February this month. So long 6 months until now with some negotiation on the parliament. But indeed, this was a contentious moment in Portuguese politics. And I think that it will still remain contentious because some parties are already stating that they will send the law to the Constitutional Court. Although the law will stay in place, they will request some aspects out of the law to be assessed by the Constitutional Court. And if the Constitutional Court ends up stating that they are unconstitutional, those aspects of the law will be removed. So that's the general overview. And let's probably dig into the changes that will occur.
Thank you, Daniel.
Topics that you'd like to start?
Well, thank you for that overview and a sense of time scale there, of time framework. We've been here before in a way, haven't we? We thought it was all done and dusted. And then I think about 10 days ago, a week ago last Monday, the president left for Poland, didn't he? And left a note really showing his dissatisfaction about this and also acknowledging exactly what you said, that he recognized there wasn't much he could do about it. But he really gave in quite a very interesting and wise way, a telling off really to the government, I think, in the note that he left before he left for Poland and Ukraine. And then in the wake of that, as you say, other opposition parties have got stuck in and really have been quite aggressive with their language about what they intend to do with this law. So we'll wait and see on that. All we can do at the moment is get your wise view on what's gone on so far. We will look at the golden visa tonight. We'll look at the Airbnb situation and, of course, the rental market, which is of great importance to people here. And we'll look at areas that will be affected and the reasons behind the changes. Will there be alterations or is it ending? That's the golden visa, of course, another like a stay of execution for the golden visa, which will, of course, be of some interest to some people here tonight. For homeowners, will the new housing laws influence your rights and responsibilities if the property is considered vacant? That's a big worry for some people, having their property confiscated. And not by no means an exhaustive and complete list, but enough to keep us going. Impact on landlords and short-term holiday lets, which, of course, is important to anyone thinking of investing in such an opportunity here in Portugal. So if we could extend then, first of all, Daniel, into the areas that will be affected and what prompted this in the first place? Why all this hoo-ha and why did it become such a hot political issue?
Yeah, well, let's probably start with something that you said, the telling off of the president. What the president basically conveyed to the parliament and to the party in power was that, well, this is a package that will influence the life in Portugal for the next 10 or 15 years. So it's something relevant. and a political consensus should be obtained between the two major parties. This was basically what the president was trying to convey, and he is right, because if a package like this is just approved by one party, the main party in power at the moment, when the other guys will eventually win the election, so the power will change hands, and this will mean that they will probably backtrack on a lot of these measures. So what's the point of having a few measures approved now, then backtracking, then going back and forth again, especially because some of the measures are to have effect in the 2030. Especially the things connected with local housing or AL or Airbnb, as you want to call it. The licenses connected with Airbnb, they will be valid until 2030. But the guys in power now, they don't know if they will be in power at that time. So this, indeed, as it's something so relevant for the life in Portugal, is something that the main political parties should have a consensus, but it wasn't possible, unfortunately. What kickstarted this was there was a lot of people complaining that the house prices in Portugal and the rental prices in Portugal are not in line with the wages that people earn here in the country, and they are right. So there's a problem. There's a really underlying problem in the country that things are misaligned. But in my view, the situation would be sorted in two different fields. The first one is more construction, more people doing construction business in Portugal, and simplifying the construction permits. And this was done. I need to be fair with the people in government. This was done. But the other aspect out of this is on the legal department, and this would be easy eviction processes and expedited eviction processes, because there's a lot of people that will not put the houses in the market and that have vacant houses, that they are too afraid of putting the houses down in the rental market, because they know that if the tenants are not honest people, if they don't pay the rent, it's going to be hard to evict them. It's going to take quite a long time. So this would do a big difference, in my opinion, if we had an expedited eviction process. And when I say expedited, 2-3 months, and for US clients, this is way more than you basically see in the US, but in Portugal, an eviction process can take between 6 to 9 months, even more. So this would sort out some of the problems. And the other one, I think, is an easier tax regime, or at least not tax people so much when they put the houses down in the rental market, would motivate a lot of people that have vacant houses to put them in the rental market. This is my suggestion as one operator in the property market here in Portugal, with someone that deals with evictions and with people buying properties, renting out properties. But those are my 2 cents on this.
Well, you think that should happen? You think that should happen, or that is ready to happen? That's the law that's being wheeled out.
No, this is what should happen. This is not what's happening, unfortunately.
Okay, all right.
So let's probably start with the golden visa situation, to get that out of the way, and to just explain what is the new legal frame that is coming. So in the end of 2021, we had the golden visa that allowed investors to buy property anywhere in Portugal, and you have different tiers that people can do a refurbishment project. If they have a refurbishment project, the minimum investment or the investment would be lower. If they just bought the property outright, the investment would be a little bit higher, but no zones were excluded in terms of property to inhabit. But the government did perceive that the image of the golden visa was not the most positive one in Portugal, so they've limited the investment for properties to inhabit to what we call low density or interior regions. So the golden visa, since the end of 2021, was actually providing a lot of investment for properties to inhabit in low density territories. And this was actually good for the country, because the investment was not being put in Lisbon or Porto, so there was not pressure in those cities or coastal properties, actually. And this was actually good to develop the interior of the country. So it was a bit of a surprise to me that the people in power that approved this law at the end of 2021 now backtracked and said, well, it's not possible to have the golden visa whatsoever for properties to inhabit. And this is, once this new law will be approved, this is what will happen. So basically, properties to inhabit, or even any type of property, commercial property, will be out of the equation for the golden visa. What's going to be left of the program is investment funds. So investment funds located in Portugal that do invest in Portuguese companies, and they need to invest at least 60% of their capital in Portuguese companies. This will still be a route for investors that want to obtain the golden visa. So the program is not completely shut off. There's still a route for people that want the golden visa. And I do emphasize that the golden visa for someone that wants to have a residency permit in Portugal, but not live full-time in the country, is the best way to go forward, because it will allow easy access to enter Schengen. It's just 7 days per year, the minimum requirement to stay in the country. And this allows people to get in and get out Schengen. For nationalities that need a Schengen visa, this is highly important. And eventually, if the applicant does pass the Portuguese the Portuguese language test, will allow obtaining the Portuguese nationality, but of course only if the applicant knows Portuguese. So in short, golden visa properties are out of the equation, only investment funds, and this is the way moving forward. As I said, it was a bit of a surprise, because I think that the program as it was being highly beneficial for interior and low density regions in Portugal that were reaping the benefits of having foreign investment done in those regions. So in fact, the golden visa since the end of 2021 was not affecting cities or big cities like Lisbon or Porto, but this was, again, the golden visa was a bit of the ugly duckling out of the residency permits. And as it has a name, it was blamed for the lack of housing in Portugal. But just to have a perspective on the numbers, the golden visa issued until now around 11 or 12,000 residency permits. So this is 12,000 properties bought. So it's a drop in the ocean. And there's around 8,000 processes in the making. So let's say 20,000 properties that are connected with golden visas. And not only some of those properties are commercial properties, some of those investments are connected with hotels and other types of projects, and some of them are not in Lisbon or Porto or low density projects. So let's say that we have 10 to 15,000 properties in coastal areas. This is a drop in the ocean. This is not what's doing the housing prices in Portugal, for sure. And well, but again, it has a name, so they decided to shut down the program and only have residency permits connected with investment funds.
So it's on the way out. As we know it's on the way out. But there is, I mean, you must have had a little bit of a rush before we move on to Airbnb and that sort of thing. I mean, there is a rush. We work with Holborn Assets at Expats Portugal as well. There's a special webinar for those scrabbling, as I'm sure you've had clients coming to you, Daniel, to get this over the line. If you want to join us for a special webinar on Tuesday, the 12th of September, Golden Visa Investment Opportunity still available. And thank you, Astrid, for popping a link into the chat for registering for that special webinar.
It's been a crazy last few months, because investors that really want the Golden Visa now are just going forward with the investments. So let's say that the last few months have been interesting, and a lot of work that we had here at the office, and my colleagues that work in the same area as we do, they do have exactly the same feel. There was a rush into the Golden Visa program. But again, this is only for low density properties, so it's not affecting the housing market in the main cities in Portugal.
The politicians have got a lot of value, though, haven't they? Bang for buck, as it politically, to make it seem like the bad guy in the mix here, which, as you say, it probably isn't. And it's interesting to note that maybe half as many of the total, or half of the total golden visas that there will be, haven't even happened yet. So, you made reference to the only, the few thousand that have happened. A similar amount perhaps will happen until it's not possible anymore. Can I ask you, going into the future, do you think a government made of the current opposition might reintroduce the policy?
That's a possibility, although it will not have a lot of support with the population, because again, the image that was created around the Golden Visa was not the most positive one. The program was approved around 2011 or 2012 at the peak of the Portuguese crisis, and at the time, an $500,000 property in Lisbon was considered a luxury property. Nowadays, you probably can't buy a T2 for €500,000 in Lisbon, so the property market has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
But the refurbishment that happened in Lisbon, thanks to foreign investment, was substantial. So it's something to consider when changing these laws. That 10 years ago, the foreign investment was really, really, really interesting for refurbishing Lisbon. It's still affecting positively the interior of Portugal. So we don't know if it's going to be reinstated, probably with a different name, but I don't think that will have a lot of support by the population, and thus the political parties are not too keen on just having that fight back, to be honest. And there's pressure from the EU not to have the golden visa programs anymore. So it doesn't seem likely, to be honest. That's my assessment, but it's difficult to foresee the future, of course.
The damage has been done, you might say, politically, and with the propaganda, you could also argue about it. And of course, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? I mean, one of the problems with this, of course, is the global confidence as Portugal as a safe place to invest. I think it has shaken people, and we're doing our best tonight to allay fears and let people know exactly what's going on here in Portugal with this Mais Habitação policy, and how it's going to end up, how the president's dealing with it, and how the government will finally resolve it. I think, Eshbosh, we have addressed your question here. Can you clarify how this will affect the golden visa? Are there still opportunities to obtain one? And if so, how does one obtain one at this point? So you can get in touch with Daniel. You can find him in the business directory of Expats Portugal. And don't forget that special webinar. Make a date in your diary. It's Tuesday, 12th of September for the golden visa investment opportunity via Holborn Assets as well. Anything else you want to say about the golden visa there, Daniel? And we are open to other questions about it, but I think that is that it for now before we move on to the AL kerfuffle?
Well, basically, if you still want a golden visa, please do rush. It's now or never, unless you want to invest in the investment fund, then you can take your time. No rush on that department. But if it's a golden visa connected with property, it's now or never. That's basically it.
You basically, I mean, let's just say it as it is. Get on with it.
Yes.
Or just do it, as Nike might say. All right, fantastic. The other grave concern that was aroused by this set of policies was in the rental market and people losing. I mean, we had Portuguese people with AL licenses who make their livelihood from that Airbnb or bed and breakfast guest house situation, really quite shocked and marching upon the government buildings to have this turned around. So could you give us a bit of background on that? What did it mean to Portuguese people and other investors in the AL licenses? In fact, let's start with what is an AL license, Daniel?
Well, basically, an AL license in Portuguese is alojamento local, and this means local lodging. And to operate an Airbnb from Portugal, you need to have this license. It's something fairly easy to obtain. You need to jump a few hoops at the current moment. You need to have fire extinguishers, a manual at the property. So there's a few legalities that will need to be fulfilled, but it was a fairly easy process to obtain this license. And the perception that, especially in Lisbon and Porto, that the population is having is that a lot of houses were being diverted for AL and were not being used for habitation. So they were being used for tourism. And people did perceive this as a business opportunity. So they bought properties. They've done mortgages with those properties with the intent of putting those properties on the short-term rental market. and making a profit out of this. And this did assist as well to refurbish the city center, especially in the old areas like Moraria in Lisbon. This was interesting to have those areas refurbished. The main problem, and again, the public image out of the AL is that it kicked out a lot of people off those areas. That if you had a lady or living over there for the last 7 years, and now someone bought the property and evicted the lady because the area is now up and coming and good for AL, this did create somewhat of a backlash. But the problem is the problem with the rental market in Portugal is rooted even deeper, and it has the origins in the 50s or 60s, that the rents were frozen by the government at that time, and no one wanted to mess with this. So you had situations of people paying 20 euros for a house in downtown Lisbon. And of course, if you're paying 20 euros for a house, you don't want to move, not in your life. So there was a mismatch between what the rental incomes were possible with AL and with people renting properties in downtown Lisbon. So these situations were creating a lot of evictions. And again, the public image of AL became darker and darker outside. So again, the government did a few things. One of them that I do agree with, and this is increasing the taxation on AL, just because having this AL regime was highly advantageous in terms of taxation, and now it's not as advantageous tax-wise. So this I do agree, just moving the tax around and making it not as attractive tax-wise to have an AL. So this part I do agree with. The other part is something that I do struggle with agreeing, and this is just putting a cap on the licenses until 2030 and stating that the licenses will be reevaluated. So there's a lot of people that did serious investments, that did mortgages, that paid contractors to refurbish those properties because they were counting with income generated from that property. Pardon. And now they are seeing the situation grimmer by the minute, because they may not eventually get compensated on the risk that they have, and they may not see the money that they've invested back. So there's a lot of worry, and because it's the studies state that 60 or 70,000 families in Portugal do live with exploring an AL. So they have as their main activity this AL business and providing services for AL. So it's a big industry.
That's significant, isn't it? That's quite incredible. Yeah,
It is. Indeed it is. But there's a balance that will need to be reached over here between having people conducting AL businesses and not having the downtowns of cities becoming Disneyland. So a balance between the two should be obtained. And in my opinion, this should be done on the local level. So the situation in Lisbon and Porto is really, really different from Coimbra and from other cities in the country. So I think that each municipality should decide. And for instance, in Lisbon, the municipality has decided already not to provide any new AL licenses. And in my opinion, this makes sense because the city was becoming too overcrowded with AL, and this was stealing properties from the long-term rental market. So it's sensible to have a measure like this because, again, things were not balanced in Lisbon. But the same rule should not be applicable for Setúbal, for instance, 40 kilometers from Lisbon, because Setúbal situation is completely different. So this should be decided on the local level. It's more or less what the government has provided now, because the first proposal out of the law was that no new AL licenses should be attributed. Now, again, on the local municipalities can decide on the topic, although all the licenses will be reevaluated in 2030. And they should be in use because some people do have the AL license, but they don't do short-term rental in their properties. So proof of doing the short-term rental in that property is necessary, and this is probably with invoices issued from that property. So this is something that it makes sense. Again, if the property is not being used for AL, the license should be revoked. That's fair enough and sensible. But it's
Daniel, if I could interrupt for just a moment, I mean, that makes a lot of sense that it would be better decided at local level, because it's a blunt instrument, isn't it? Whenever there's a central government measure, it can be a very blunt instrument that, as you say, is very inappropriate in Lisbon, where might be a good idea to sort of choke back the proliferation of AL there. But in another town or city, it might be really good for the economy, mightn't it? So let's hope that other people in opposition maybe come forward with that proposal and it goes that way. For the people here on the webinar tonight who are thinking, I'll go to Portugal, I want to live in Portugal and I want to open up my own Airbnb, guest house, that sort of situation. What's your advice to them at the moment?
Don't buy property that has horizontal property. This basically is, don't buy an apartment and do AL with it. Because one of the instruments that the government did include in this new law is that a condominium unit holder, so someone from the building, can oppose the AL to be installed in that building, and thus you will not obtain the AL license. So if you buy a detached house, that's good. You can do AL with it. That's perfect. But if you buy an apartment, don't buy an apartment with the intent of doing AL unless you are 100% sure that the condominium will approve the AL in that building. You can put it with a condition on the purchase, for instance. And even though, be mindful that the condominium may revoke the authorization, and this would lead into the revocal of the license as well. So the main piece of advice, the most important one, is don't buy an apartment, the one that has horizontal property or that the property is divided in several units. Buy a detached house, and then you can do AL without a lot of concern. And in the interior regions, in the rural properties, AL will still be attributed. So this is more again on the coastal properties, on the high density areas that may be problematic. For low density areas, that's not so much of a problem. But again, don't buy a property on an apartment and consider to have an AL. If you have it, that's a plus, but don't make that your main business plan. That's basically it.
That's good insight. And of course, that isn't legal advice, is it? Because these things change in ways that are far beyond your control. That's kind of indicative and your sense of the situation. So perhaps think about detached residences in purchase and renting out part of that building or another building on the same site within the interior. But if you go into like a coastal place or the big towns and it's an apartment, that could be a little bit riskier at the moment with the way things are going. So thank you for that insight on there. Rentals and the impact of all of these political measures for people who are thinking of becoming landlords, but also, Daniel, people who are worried about getting a rental for themselves. The impact might reach that far, mightn't it? It's not as if they're in plentiful supply at the moment, is it? Rental contracts for the D7.
The situation backfired completely. And,
okay, go on. Tell us more.
Basically, there's an instrument in the Portuguese law that once you have a rental contract and the contract keeps on renewing, you have a law that the government approves every year that basically states how much you are able to increase your rent. So this is common and it's a percentage. It's usually more or less in line with inflation, although these past 2 years with the skyrocketing inflation, this was not the case. The percentage was around 2%, and inflation in Portugal was more than 7%. So basically, the government decides how much will you be able to legally increase the rent. But then they've added a caveat with this law, and what they've stated is that you cannot increase the rent for new contracts. So let's say that you have a contract now. And this is only after the law is approved. So again, this is not in place yet, but it's after the law is approved, and it has it really had a pernicious effect on the situation. So what people did was, because of this law that will come, is that for new contracts, you are not able to increase the rent more than 2%. So let's say that you have a contract for 1,000 euros that just finished now, and the law is eventually already approved. You're only able to increase the rent on that contract for 2%. So you're not able to put the rent at 1,200 in line with the market. And what happened was all the contracts that eventually may be renewed or that would be renewed, the landlords did the economical sensible thing, and instead of just allowing the automatic renewal, they terminated the contract and they said to the tenant, well, if you want to stay in the property, the rent is X. Or they just obtained a new tenant with an increased rent, because they knew that once this new law would come into force, they would be highly limited in increasing the rent into the future. So this backfired completely.
Yes.
And a lot of contracts that would simply just be renewed automatically by the due effect of the law and by the contract, they were terminated, and the rent was increased substantially. Pardon. Or they just obtain new tenants with the increase in the rent. So instead of the rents lowering down, they increased because of this not so sensible measure. And this was something not well thought of. I do understand.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes against the whole spirit of what the legislation was meant to be about, which is to make more accommodation available at a reasonable price and to protect the supply, basically.
And
so how unfortunate.
People that wanted to put the house in the rental market, they were afraid to put the house in the rental market because A, evictions are difficult, as I said, and B, even if they terminate a contract, let's say that they sign a contract today, in 2 years from now, they terminate that contract, and instead of just being able to put the house in line with the rents that are being requested at that time in the market, they will not be able to do so. They will only be able to have a small increase in the rent, and this doesn't make any sense. So this is creating already a distortion in the market, and it will create a distortion in the market for the next few years. So I think it's just a measure that it was not well thought of. It's just wishful thinking what they were doing, and it's not going to have an happy ending, I think.
Well, how unfortunate is how I'm going to put it. So if somebody is thinking of becoming a landlord here as part of their portfolio in Portugal, part of their retirement plan, again, how should they proceed with that in mind, Daniel?
Well, my advice usually for people that want to rent out the properties that they own is that they should have as many people as possible in the contract. So let's say the two people in the couple, but if they have a friend living in the property as well, or if a friend wants to share the house, that person should be in the contract, because then you can just have more people that you can go to court and claim the rents back if someone stops paying. And the other one, and this is quite difficult for people that want to come to Portugal and obtain a rental property, is to have a guarantor, or as we call it here in Portugal, a fiador. Because if that person stops paying the rent, or the tenants stop paying the rent, then you can go and pawn the fiador assets here in Portugal. So this is the main line of protection that I usually tell the clients: have as many people as possible in the contract and request a fiador. If the applicant, as the majority of the foreigners that are coming to Portugal don't have a fiador or a guarantor, then they should provide enough financial evidences that they will be able to pay the rent. And this is having income that is at least 3 times the rent that needs to be paid. So if the rent is 1K, they should be earning per month minimum 3K, so they can cover the rental expenses. And to have as many financial documents as possible, just to perceive if that person is sound financially. There's other people that do an alternative situation, and this is requesting a full year of rent paid in advance. This is not strictly legal. So what's legal in Portugal is that you can have 2 rents up front and 2 security deposits. So in total 4 rents. But having a full year, this is not legal. But the market has been doing this practice just to have some coverage on people defaulting on the rental contract. So this is not something that I do advise clients to do, but this is what the rental market is, what's being practiced in the rental market. Tenants or landlords requesting a full month or a full year, in advance to have the rent paid, just so they can rest assured that those clients have the financial capability of paying the rent in time. So these are basically
and that's from the point of view of if somebody wants to become a landlord. And of course, if you are becoming a tenant, which you're likely to be in your first year, and you'll need your 12-month rental contract for your D7. Nuno has an insurance service that is a replacement for the fiador. Did you call it there, Daniel? Okay, so there is a way of having that happen for a landlord that asks for it. It's difficult without a credit history, of course, as a foreigner coming into Portugal to show that, but Nuno has a solution for that at Winsurance, and I suspect he'll be with us for the Dream Team session if you want further clarification. Let's conclude this main part of the conversation we're having about the what's going on with Mais Habitação, the housing situation in Portugal, with a couple of questions, and then we'll turn off the recording and allow people who've had questions prompted by the conversation to ask them if they would prefer to do that in person rather than have it recorded. For the time being, we've got a few coming in. Thanks, Daniel, so far. I really appreciate that. Is there a problem if I live with a current resident who rents an apartment? Presumably that sounds like the route of having an atestado and not a guarantor, but somebody who says you're living with them, which I know is another type of
I didn't grasp the question, Carl. May you please repeat it?
Is there a problem if I live with a current resident who is in Tamar? I think that's irrelevant where it is. But if you live with someone else, if you come and live with somebody in Portugal, is there likely to be a change in the law that affects that?
I don't think so. And you did touch base with the Estado de Residência, that this is a certificate from the municipality that demonstrates that that person is living there, and this is accepted in CEF. So we're not foreseeing any changes with that, as long as the applicant is able to obtain that Estado de Residência or this certificate. Usually you need 2 witnesses that are voters, that are registered voters in that municipality, so you can obtain this certificate, and this is accepted within the booking for biometric data booking of CEF. So it's something that can be used, and we're not foreseeing any changes on that department.
Yeah, there you go.
Say the certificate again. I'm sorry, I couldn't. What is that certificate that I need to get?
It's a Estado de Residência in Portuguese, and this is a residency certificate that the municipality, Junta de Freguesia, or the council will basically declare or pass, and this declaration is accepted within the booking of CEF. And you usually need 2 witnesses that are living in that property, certifying that you are living in that property.
What I'd suggest, Serena, is to go with the person you're living with to
Correct.
Freguesia and start the ball rolling with what they want locally there, in accordance with what Daniel's told you there. Is that everything for you, Serena?
I'm still trying to get my visa, so I'm still in Colorado. I'm not living with her yet. So I'm trying to get my visa, and I wanted to know, is it going to be an issue to get a D7 visa if I am living with my friend who currently lives in Tamar in a 3-bedroom apartment?
Okay. Well, I'm not the specialist in visas. This is the Jilva's side of things. But from what I'm hearing is that they are only accepting or property purchased in Portugal, so a deed, or a rental agreement. I don't think that they are accepting for the residency visa that certificate, but this, take it with a grain of salt, because I'm not 100% sure on this department, okay?
Serena,
If you
join us at
request
9.
information, correct. Join
Yeah.
the webinar at 9 because someone from EI will be over there and able to provide clarity on this topic.
Yeah, if you can
All
stick
right.
with us for another 3/4 of an hour, we'll have the Dream Team session, and I'm sure somebody from AEI will be able to help you with that and nail that. Thanks for that question. Appreciate it. Barak, if once we purchase our home, if we want to stay in the home but rent a room, are we able to do that? And will that qualify for a D7 visa? So you're renting a room in your own house? Is that what's being suggested here? Sorry, qualify for the rental agreement for the person who wants to get their D7 or D8, Daniel. I think you understand that question better than I do.
Yeah, that's totally possible because you are, if you just want to rent a room, you have the legal instruments to do so. You can rent the room for students or rent the room for someone that wants to have that wants to come to Portugal and to stay here. But renting the room will entail, of course, money swapping hands and a 28% taxation on the income received. So be aware of this 28% situation, Barak. Eventually, some consulates a few years back when I was working with EI were accepting the comodato agreement or the lending agreement, but I don't think that they are accepting this anymore. So again, I think that the only options for residency visas are indeed or tenancy agreement or property purchase. So, yeah. But addressing Barak's situation, totally fine in renting a room and that person requesting a residency visa via that route.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Barak, for that question. And yeah, let's get that cleared up from EI's point of view as well from mine. Excellent question from Sarah. And I've got a bigger question here because I think this really confuses people, Daniel. They come here for a scouting trip or a holiday in Portugal, and they see so much empty property around, and they think to themselves, there can't possibly be a housing crisis in Portugal. Look at all that empty property. Could you give us a brief explanation of why that is the case?
Well, the Sarah's question here, the law that discusses mandating rental vacant properties. This is going to be the most Portuguese law ever.
Right. And it's to do with all these empty properties, right? So you see them.
No. It's the effect of this law will be zero.
Okay, all right.
That's why it's going to be the most Portuguese law ever. This is just political. Just a political banner that the party in power decided to put in place, but they did so many restrictions on this law that it will not prove. I really don't think that you'll have more than 2 houses in the full country that will be with forced tenancy. But just to explain what this forced tenancy is.
Where are they likely to be, Daniel? There are people on this call who want to know where these 2 houses are going to be that are coming onto the market.
Well, 2 lost houses in Lisbon that no one knows who the real property owner is, or just it's not going to have any real effect. But basically, what this forced tenancy means is that the public authorities, if they see that the house is vacant and it's not a secondary home or a house that you spend holidays, so if you have a secondary home and you say that you come to Lisbon to spend holidays 2 days per year, then you qualify not to have the forced tenancy. If you live abroad, you have a house in Portugal, and you live abroad, you're not qualified for forced tenancy. So they have so many restrictions that the law will not be operational at all. But the thesis behind it is that the government will notify people that have the houses vacant, and if they cannot prove that they fall in one of those criteria that will waive the forced tenancy, then the government will take possession out of the property, will do forced tenancy on the property, will rent it out, and will provide the profit out of this forced tenancy to the property owner. This will never happen. It's impossible. It's impossible. I know public authorities in Portugal, and the municipalities will not be interested in doing this. They are the ones who are responsible of doing this procedure. So this is just something for the government to show off that they're trying to do something. Don't
But
be too
again,
concerned on this part.
it
It's just,
backfired, didn't it? It was another thing that backfired because everyone just suddenly thought they were going to have their empty property snatched off them. And this is far from it. You're putting our minds at rest on that. And I can imagine all of these local government offices have got enough. It's not like they're sitting there doing nothing, is it? They're understaffed. The last thing they want to do is go around taking people's empty properties.
It's supposedly the utility companies will communicate to the authorities if the property has low consumptions. So the first thing that drops into my mind is the Data Protection Act. So I don't think that this is too legal in my perception, the sharing of the data from the clients into the public authorities. And the other key aspect is that what if the person that has a vacant house has personal property inside the house? What are they going to do with that personal property? Are they going to rent out a storage place? This is a non-operational law. I know that it scares a lot of people and it faced a lot of backlash, but this is something that I really doubt that we will see any houses with forced tenancy because there's so many bureaucratic problems with doing this that it doesn't make any sense at all. Me as a lawyer, I have processes in court to evict people, and I have orders of eviction that are not fulfilled because of still pending COVID laws, or people that claim that they don't have enough money to pay a rent elsewhere, and so things are just dragging on in court. If this will generate zero houses for the rental market, it's just something really dumb that the government did.
All right, we get the picture. A quickie before we end the recording here, and we go to some more personal and private questions that are off the record, as it were, or off the recording. We have our apartment, says Yumiko, and have an AL license that was granted in 2020. If one of the residents in the building objects to the AL, will our AL license be revoked and become null and void?
That's a possibility nowadays. So keep your or once this law is approved, not nowadays. Keep your neighbors happy and do offer yourself in the condominium meetings if the topic is indeed discussed to pay extra condominium fees, and this is an increase in 20% on condominium fees. So my advice for people that have AL housing in apartments with horizontal property is to have representation within the condominium units, to try to have the neighbors happy, and to offer to pay the extra condominium fees, not legal fees. It's envisioned in the law, because it will have a different and positive light from the neighbors regarding having the AL over there. Because otherwise, the neighbors will look into the situation and we'll see a lot of people coming in and out. So a burden on the building and no benefit on the building. So if the property owners that have AL do offer to chip in and pay more on the condominium fees, I think that the majority of the neighbors will be happy, and try to control as much as possible the tenants that are in the property, so they don't make a lot of noise and they don't create a disturbance in the building. That's basically the advices that I have, because the people in the condominium and the unit holders will have way more power once this law is approved than the situation at the current moment.
Great advice, and a really good lesson in Portuguese neighborliness. Look after your neighbors, and that's a really good way to go about it if you want to influence them positively in your block where you may have an AL license that they can collectively revoke. I think we'll leave it there. You can, of course, a great job tonight, Daniel. And of course, you can find Dr. Daniel Reis of Reis and Pelicano in the Expats Portugal Business Directory. We'll go to your question or your comment, Julie, and Deborah and Ian after we've ended the recording. Anything you want to add, Daniel, before we push the stop button?
Well, Portugal is still a safe country to invest. Although this whole mayhem of a law, this is still a safe country to invest. Just some of these changes will need to be taken with a grain of salt, because they're not to be fully operational. This is just a political publicity. So the government seems that they are doing something instead of addressing the real problem. This is new construction. That's basically it. In one line, this is the description that I do in this Mais Habitação program. It's still safe to invest. People will not get into your property and possess it. So take the changes with a grain of salt, because they're not as bad as they eventually look.
That's really reassuring, isn't it? And what we're seeing here, of course, is a lesson in how Portuguese politics works, where the politicians are looking in rather than out across the world, and understanding how this might be perceived globally. So thank you for those reassuring words there to conclude our webinar tonight. Thank you so much, Daniel. And we'll take some more questions after we've ended the recording here.